Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Vagrantsong from Weird Games. And Vagrantsong is a boss battling, dungeon crawling-esque, not really dungeon crawling, more the boss battling one, experience in which you are playing as a bunch of vagrants who are on a train trying to take down the Haint. The Haint being the boss of the situation, the character that has their own AI, their own set of rules, their own scenario around how they operate, what they're doing, and how they're going to present a unique challenge to you. You basically are on this train, you have a bunch of rules around how you have to operate. The rules are going to be variable to each scenario to a degree in the way modifications happen, in the way the boss acts, but effectively on your turn, a vagrant's going to go ahead and spend their coins to take a bunch of actions. Your vagrant can move around the board, you can investigate various locations, there can be different icons or different spots where you can investigate something, or there are going to be different attacks or skills you can activate. So you can activate a basic attack, you can go ahead and activate investigate, you can try to heal yourself, you can rummage through the boss bag, giving you a token that will be useful to you, but also give you some degree of control over the boss's rummage bag and how they're going to activate, or you can go ahead and move around the board, or finally you can activate a variety of different skills that your characters have, skills that will often involve increasing humanity. Now, increasing humanity is a big core part of the game because your characters, as they get hurt, they lose their humanity, which means increasing your humanity is a good thing. At the same time, you're basically fighting against ghosts, these Haints over here. By increasing their humanity, you are effectively hurting them, which is at least an interesting choice over here, in which whenever the game has you increasing humanity, it is a good thing in either direction. Increasing your humanity is good because you're healing yourself. Increasing the Haint's humanity is good because you are, well, making them more human, which allows for a bunch of effects to operate in a way that can target different characters, increasing anyone's humanity, which is a good thing no matter what. But either way, that's a bit of a tangent to the way humanity works. Past that, after every single character takes their turn, spending their coins, you're going to go ahead and have the Vagrant take the Haint take their turn. The Haint will then follow a system of AI, which involves taking a token from this bag. You're going to go ahead, you're going to draw a token from the bag, and do whatever it says depending on the state, the current phase of the Haint. You see, Haints have a bunch of different options as far as their moods, the different moods they have and the different way they're going to activate depending on what you draw. This character over here, depending on whether he's mournful or weeping, this token will have a different effect, and you'll just follow the effects of that token. Those effects are going to be very, 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 very variable depending on what's actually going on in the scenario. So for instance, this character over here has this little tree here that's going to be a big part of his strategy. They're also going to have various holes popping up across the train, but every single Haint is a different challenge. But the AI aspect of it involves drawing a token, putting it down onto the spot over here, the cycle track, where you can see which tokens are drawn, because once you hit a certain number, you're going to cycle the bag, which has its own effect. There's a whole bunch of effects going on in this game. There's going to be various status effects that will range from scenario to scenario. There's going to be different cycle effects, what happens when you put the tokens back in the bag, how that activates. There's going to be different rules for how the Haint changes mood, and there's going to be different actions. This whole list of actions over here, which involves how the character actually goes ahead and does their actions depending on what you draw and depending on the mood they're in. Additionally, once you flip the page over there, you're going to have all these different reading effects over here. There's little scenario paragraphs that are going to be relevant depending on what activates any one of those numbers. What I mean by that is there's going to be a whole bunch of numbers around the board. There's going to be numbers in the actual bindle, that's the little bag over here. There's going to be numbers on the round track. There's going to be numbers on the health track. There's going to be numbers on the break track. There's going to be numbers on the actual board. All those numbers represent different ways to actually go ahead and read a story paragraph that often has some effect. It might have you taking some sort of test of some sort. It might have you doing just some sort of reading the paragraph and finding a piece of gear, finding an item, finding some junk, finding something in the game, or possibly changing up the game state. There's going to be a bunch of other things going on here. This is not a rules video. This is just a high-level overview. There's going to be these cards over here, these rituals, which are a lot of fun and a big part of the appeal of diving into Vagrantsong every single time. These rituals, every single one of the 20 scenarios in the game has their own set of 3 rituals, and when you accomplish a ritual, you get to flip it over and see what you just did. And these often represent some sort of goal you have, some sort of aspect of, sure, I can just hit the Haint in the head again and again and again, although technically you're restoring their humanity, so the hit is not really a hit. But you can go ahead and restore the Haint's humanity as your primary target, or you can take a little bit of a time apart from that as your goal in order to accomplish rituals, because those rituals will often give you a lot of positive effects, including restoring the Haint's humanity to a degree. So you have to often choose how to divide your various vagrants' attention tension between the primary goal of just taking down the Haint, or as well taking down the rituals, which will ultimately potentially help you in taking down the Haint, but because you don't know what they do on the other side, it's always a bit of a gamble as to what will be useful to you at the right time. Now the Haint has their own health track over here. When the Haint's health reaches the full amount of humanity over there, they're going to break on this side, which basically has the idea that every Haint has a variable number of breaks, a variable number of points we have to hit their health track again and again, restoring their humanity. There's going to be the round track, which I mentioned already, which is the idea that as you have these rounds, you're going to advance the round marker, which often can have an effect depending on what numbers are on that round track. Sometimes they're one-time effects, sometimes they're ongoing effects. There's going to be a lot of scenery on the table, scenery that will have different ways that you interact with. The way the Haint, being a ghost, can wander through the scenery and have a little more freedom of movement. You have to dance around, on the other hand. There'll be various scenery that's custom to the specific scenario you're placing. So for example, this scenario over here has those various holes that will start off on the board, as well as be popping up as you go through the game as well. And that's basically what's going on in Vagrantsong. Once again, you have your characters, your vagrants, they have their abilities, you're going to be taking actions to try to achieve the scenario's goals, and then from there you're trying to ultimately win the scenario. Now when you're done with that, you're going to go to the end of scenario phase, where you'll turn this page over here, and you'll go through the sequence at the end. You're going to go through the camp phase, where you get to spend your coins to, in some way, heal yourself up. You can heal various skills that have been hit throughout the game, you can unlock new skills, because this is ultimately a campaign experience. This is a game where you're going to be going through 20 different scenarios as you go through the full journey over here, although you do go through them in a variable order depending on these cards over here. You see, these cards is going to be one of the last things you do every single camp phase, where you as a team are going to collectively look at the cards, and then either individually or collectively, some are individually, you'll make choices as far as what you do, and then resolve those choices. See what you unlocked, what you found, whether you found a boon for the next scenario, something that's going to get in your way, or whether you're choosing one of the variable pathways forward as you go through this, not really a full choose your own adventure, but choosing the order of the adventure as you go through Vagrantsong. And that's basically it, past other things like skills and junk and detailed abilities and exactly how some things work, and the idea that as you take wounds, you're going to mark those over. If you can't take a wound because all your stuff's already flipped, then you can be westbound instead, which will be a whole different situation going on there, but I'm trying to focus a little bit more high-level overview, so I'm not going to go into detail on all of those, which brings us to the review part of things, starting off with ease of play. Now, the rulebook itself is actually fairly long, but that said, it's also fairly clear at the same time. You will have to reference things multiple times, at least in my opinion. For myself, I frequently did have to reference the rulebook until I got that cycle of how things worked locked down. Again, everything's very clear, but it's lengthy and there's a lot going on as far as managing the exact sequence of play. The bigger issue you're going to face is the fact that every single scenario has their own little miniature rules attached to it, which I touched upon briefly already. The idea that you'll have various status effects that are going to vary by scenario. The idea you'll have different terrain effects. The fact that whenever you break the Haint, whenever you hit one of their breakpoints, they'll have different scenario, different rules as far as how they activate. You'll have different rules depending on what happens when you cycle the various tokens back into the bindle. You'll have various things as far as how you change their mood. You'll have 10 different actions for most characters. Sometimes some of them have a little different situation going on, but for most characters you'll have 10 different actions that you'll have to be going through, which means the actual core rules you'll have down after 2, maybe 3 games. You'll have them basically down, but you'll always be constantly checking and rechecking the various details of the scenario you're in, which definitely does take away from the ease of play. You'll have that constant checking for things to see what's different and hoping that you'll play it right. I guarantee you, I have not played this game correctly a single time. I've always missed something and then realized, oh my gosh, I forgot that in this scenario, the Haint has this cycle effect. I gotta get that down into my muscle memory. Past that, the game is a campaign game, which will contribute to the ease of play aspect. In general, this is a game where, while it's a very light in terms of other campaign games and how much you're tracking between games, you still are tracking things between games. If you put this game away and want to come back to it 2 months later, you're going to still try to be figuring out, okay, which equipment did I have? Did I properly set it away? Because the last time I put it away, maybe I thought I was going to continue it tomorrow and I didn't. You'll have whatever typical campaign issues you generally have around campaign games, although that will vary depending on how good you are at those, and this is on the lower scale as far as how much you're tracking in between games. The games themselves tend to last around 45 to 90 minutes, 45 to 90 minutes per game, roughly, 45 minutes to an hour and a half per game. Some have had a little bit longer than that, but not significantly so. And table space is actually fairly reasonable. This is the table space you'll need for 3 players, nothing else, so that part is fairly reasonable. As far as player count, this, I believe, is rated as a 2 to 4 player game, although you can definitely play it solo, and I think that's because of the interactions of the story or reading different things to each other, but you can definitely go through that experience solo. I have had most of my I play is playing through the solo. That said, I have played this at 1, 2, and 3 players. I have no real interest to play it as 4. That just means you're further spacing out your turns. I would say that 2 is likely my favorite player count. It gives me the most constantly involved in the action. Playing 2 characters, by the way. Playing as 2 characters each with 2 players has been my favorite way to play. That said, I've enjoyed 3, and I've also enjoyed playing it solo, controlling 3 different characters as I go through it. And the game scales fairly well based on player counts because of the fact that the Haint is operating after every single Vagrant's turn. So again, 1, 2, and 3 players has all been good. 4 I'd be willing to, but I just think it would be my least favorite player count. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like, and this is a hard game to go through. There's so much here that I really enjoy. To begin with, the general theme and presence of everything going on here is absolutely amazing. The art of Vagrantsong is wonderful. I mean, this is art you've only seen in a handful of games so far, the general stylings of it, and they really do a great job of implementing it here. Between the acrylic standees that are absolutely amazing, the art on those standees, having certain characters like the turned faces, which is one of the first characters you'll face off against, having this little character over here, the turned faces that you're just going to turn it around and hopefully not drop it, and you just always have a different face on the other side. This turned faces is constantly turning around to face you, but it's got gorgeous art, great acrylic standees. The board itself is a little boring, so that part's fine, but that's part of the nature of utilizing the same train car sequence for every single one of the scenarios. But overall, the theme, the aesthetic, all that stuff is off the chart. And then you also have the story elements. You have mounds of text as you go through every single thing. You have the individual, every scenario has its own section of text you'll be going through, and then multiple story points that all lean into what's happening. And those story points do tell the story. You'll have different things happen as you go through each individual boss, each individual Haint. You'll have things happen as you hit different breakpoints, as you hit different rounds, as you pull tokens from the bag, and you'll have elements of a story that is slowly being unlocked. Things that are happening as you slowly restore their humanity that leads to a constantly changing pace of what's going on the board, of what you have to change or pivot or react to in their strategy. And there's a ton of variability. Those same aspects of having, well, that variability that leads to a lack of ease of play because you constantly have to learn new things, that also, on the flip side, means there's a lot of variability to the experience as every single boss represents a new puzzle, a new approach. It has that AI system of how is it going to operate in tons of different ways, and you have to adapt to each boss, to what they're doing at any given moment, to what the current board state is, to which Vagrants you're playing as. There's going to be 6 Vagrants in the game, which means if I'm playing as 3 Vagrants, that gives you a lot of different ways to combine them, and then you have giant stacks of cards to go through that will just give you tons of more variability. And then that in-between phase, as you slowly upgrade your characters, as you gather more junk, as you gather more skills, as you make choices around these decks, those are a lot of fun. And I mentioned already, I love these rituals. The rituals are one of my favorite parts of the game, both because they provide a large degree of player agency to the experience, because suddenly you have this choice of, do I just keep on restoring humanity to the Haint, or how much do I really want to spend my time, heading over here, grabbing 2 candles, making my way down to this coffin, and setting 2 candles on both sides. That represents a huge gap in terms of what I can actually get done the next 2 or 3 rounds, but if I do that, maybe it'll be worth it. Maybe it'll give me an extra coin to spend in between scenarios. Maybe it'll give, 7 damage to the Haint, restoring 7 humanity to the Haint. So you have a lot of things going on, but I absolutely love the ritual cards over here and the way those play out. There's a lot going on that I particularly enjoy about Vagrantsong, which brings me to the part of the stuff that I don't like, which unfortunately is also a decently sized section. You see, as far as what I don't like, to start off with, this is a campaign game, which means it has a problem, and this is a me problem. It may or may not be a you problem. You have to decide that for yourself. But campaign games in general, for me, represent that barrier of entry. I frequently fall into that camp of being someone who puts it away, expecting to play it in the next week or so, and suddenly 3 months go by, and I forgot to take notes, and I don't know what's going on, and I have to pull it out and remember where I left off. Now, again, that problem has been absolutely minimized in Vagrantsong. First of all, 3 months haven't gone by yet, but secondly, even if I pulled it off the shelf a month later, which did happen, it was fairly easy to pick up where I left off because there isn't as much tracking. So, while it is a campaign game, or while it still does suffer from those, at least for me and the way I interact with campaign games, which again is a me problem, decide if it's a you problem or not, but it's definitely minimal, but it still is a problem. But then more importantly than that, I would say this game does have a lower decision space than I'd like. I just spent a minute telling you all about how these rituals give you a lot of decision space, and I like that so much because I feel it's the biggest amount of decision space I have in this game. For the most part, on your turn, you're going to be taking coins and activating various abilities in order to restore humanity to the Haint. And I find most turns are fairly procedural. There's not a ton of difference in terms of, what decisions am I going to make this turn? You're going to use the skill that is the best in a given situation, which granted, you can probably take any single game that has this kind of style and just say, just just use the best thing in that situation. So I recognize you can say those words about any game. But in some games, I feel like I have that constant choice and struggle of how am I going to assign my actions, what am I going to do, what's the best course of action. And some games I feel it's more obvious and not as nuanced. And for me, Vagrantsong feels like more often than not, it's not that nuanced. It feels like for the most part, I'm going to move my character into the appropriate range to attack the Haint, to restore humanity to the Haint, and then I'm going to activate the specific ability that I can, which is further locked down by the fact that you can't activate the same skill 2 turns in a row, so I'm going to have to move those to a different skill, reducing the amount of options I have, and I'll just take the action, and then I will roll dice for basically everything in the game. So there's a lot of just basically doing the stuff that makes sense, and then that problem is made worse because of the fact that while there are a lot of skills, there's a lot of skills in the game, for the most part, I just don't feel they add that much nuance or interesting decisions around how the game plays. I find there are often small modifications to whether this one rolls more dice, this one has a higher chance of success, this one's going to move you an extra one, this is going to deal an extra damage. I don't find the skills to be, for the most part, there are exceptions, but I don't find the skills to be interesting enough that it adds to the decision space. Most of the time, my decision space in this game comes down to whether I'm going for a ritual or not, and the rest of the time I am simply activating the action that looks the most obvious, and then having the lower variety in the way the skills are different every single game means that I have a little bit of a less fun experience in that sense. And then the constant rules referencing is going to be the last thing, which is, like I said, I don't think I've ever played this game correctly, and I don't know when I will. And I don't mind playing games correctly, as long as I get the same experience, as long as I get a good experience, which I do get from Vagrantsong. But it's always another thing where I have to remember this, remember that, and it's just, I like the variety it adds. I wish there was a better way to, I don't even know, maybe it's a player aid for each scenario where it just puts it in my face, here are the things I need to be mindful of. I don't have a good answer. Maybe just more plays will get me more in the cycle of trying to track all the differences, but it is certainly a factor over there. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, those dice rolls. I did mention the dice rolls, but for me the bigger problem is the lack of agency. Rolling dice on its own doesn't particularly bother me. There is a degree of fun around rolling dice, and also you have this booming boxcars aspect, which whenever you roll a 6, you get to roll another 6, and you keep going, and you keep going, and that's always a fun mechanic, those exploding dice aspect, and this game does have that. So rolling dice in and of itself doesn't bother me that much. It bothers me a little bit when combined with the general lack of player agency, but for the most part, I think this is more of a potential problem for you. If you're someone who doesn't like rolling dice for every single action, this will likely be a problem for you. And then secondly, is going to be that gaining humanity aspect, which I do find has been confusing every time I've taught this game to a new player, and it was confusing for myself the first time I learned the game, which is the idea that you're gaining humanity yourself and you're restoring humanity to the Haint, which means anything that gives humanity is good for both directions. I find I frequently resort to the terminology of I am attacking the Haint, but really when I'm attacking the Haint, I'm actually restoring humanity. It's not a big deal. It's just a terminology thing that you have to kind of get used to, and you will get used to it within a game or two, but it's still just, I don't know, I just have it mentally locked in that you're attacking the boss, and in this case, you're sort of not attacking the boss, if that makes sense. But either way, as far as final thoughts and rating on this one, this is a hard one for me. Now, to begin with, it's worth noting that the number I assign to a rating is not nearly as meaningful as the words that I say. The words that I say hopefully give you more information as to whether this is a game that's for you or not for you, regardless of what my personal rating is on a game. That said, with that disclaimer out of the way, this is one where I went back and forth extensively. You see, the numbers I'm playing with over here are either a 3.45 or a 4 out of 5. One of those two, and I've gone back and forth so heavily because I really, really, really love the parts of Vagrantsong that I like. But I really don't love the parts of Vagrantsong that I don't like, and so I am very much in the middle here, and I've gone back and forth time and time again. Every time I'm mentally like, I want to give it a 4, I'm like, but there's not enough player agency in around the decisions I'm making. I love the theme, I love the story, I love going through those breakpoints, I love finding the different, story points as what's happening with the Haint that I'm fighting. I constantly want to go to the next scenario to see what this game is going to give me, while also having that reluctance of feeling like I'm more interested in the story and the seeing what happens than the actual gameplay choices, and so I keep going back and forth. Ultimately, I'm going to settle on a 3.5 for this one. While I really like the world that Vagrantsong is giving me, while I really like a ton of things they are doing here, I personally want to feel more like I'm making choices around what I do in the game, as opposed to just making the somewhat obvious choice of moving my Vagrant towards the relatively ideal option and just rolling dice, rinse and repeat across the game. To be very clear, I really enjoy a lot of things that Vagrantsong is doing while also just being critical of some at the same time. I spend a lot of time going back and forth, and to be frank, I'm not happy with either. When I sit there and I say it's a 3.5, I kind of want to make it a 4. Now I sit there and say it's a 4, I want to make it a 3.5. I'm going to settle at a 3.5 reluctantly, but again, please focus on the words I've said more than the actual rating, because ultimately it's your call as to whether this is a game for you. And it's worth noting, this game has getting a lot of general hype and buzz from other people, so watch other reviews, do what you need to do, and see if this is a game for you. As far as game recommendations, I have two, really. First of all, there's going to be Townsfolk Tussle. If you want a game that gives you the same vibe or feeling as the world of Vagrantsong, Townsfolk Tussle is going to be very similar in that sense. Also, similar complaints as far as the agency I have, but a lot more variety in the actual skills and items I find. And then secondly is Adventure Tactics. Adventure Tactics is going to be another game where I kind of want to go through little miniature stories, have a little bit of choose your own adventure, have a lot of character upgrading in between scenarios, and while again giving you a little bit lack of player agency as far as any individual thing, but a lot of fun upgrades to go through it. Both Adventure Tactics and Townsfolk Tussle are great games to check out if you like Vagrantsong, and vice versa. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope this video was helpful, and as always, have a good one.